again with another week and another weather wagers, this time coming from our respective homes as we're both excited for what tonight could bring with the NFL draft. And this is one of my favorite times of the year, Brett. And it's, kind of a culmination of baseball, but then also, man, football's not that far away when you think about it.
It's a great point in the calendar because the Major League Baseball season is just wrapping up. The NFL loves to put on a show. There's not a lot going on over the next few days in terms of the sporting world. And so when people can get a taste of football and seeing who their team is drafting, the NFL, especially over the last 10 years or so, has made this an event, has made this a real show. And by the way, it kicks off tonight. You can watch it on our network, ABC 27. We're excited about that. Dan, we're going to get into all of that, but we do have some topics to discuss leading into the draft. And then why don't you tell them real quickly, too, who our special guest is coming up in just a few moments.
Yeah, so we're really excited to have Zach Berman from The Athletic, and we've had some other guests on from The Athletic, too, but he is a Philly Eagle guru. I mean, I've been following him since his days on Daily News Live, which is no longer a program on the old Comcast Sportsnet. But he is as dialed in as anyone. I know Ray Didinger gave us a few pieces or a few nuggets of NFL draft advice, but Zach has really studied this too. And I give Zach a lot of credit. I've read his other pre-draft pieces years ago leading into the draft, and he's always got a good pulse of what this front office is looking for. And he's even nailed some kind of off the radar picks in the past too. So I'm very excited to see what he has to say. And I'm just excited in general because the Eagles are one of the most fascinating NFL franchises, especially when it comes to draft night.
100%. And some of you may be listening to hear about Baltimore or Pittsburgh or other NFL teams that are near and dear to your heart. And just a shout out to our sports team. Sports director Ali Barubi and her team are going to be having a pre-draft special on ABC 27 at 7:30. So you watch that, you tune in to the ESPN Game Day crew at 8. They've got it all covered for you. And we're excited to be watching this as the fans that we are, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of what exactly happens tonight, there's surprises, the great reactions of the players and their families, what they're wearing, where they're located. It's all part of the fun. And I always love, too, and I don't know if you secretly love this, but I love when the experts, so, we get called out for weather forecasting mistakes, but there's a lot of forecasting that goes on in the draft. And I love when the experts scramble, when something happens that no one expects, when someone moves up the boards 10, 20 spots. It's one of my favorite things.
Well, we're going to get into that, and there could be some surprises tonight. And this draft is a bit fascinating, as everyone is, but there are some folks that think number one maybe isn't quite as solid as it looks. We'll see. I'm not sure I'm one of those people, but we'll get into all of that. So that tips our hand a little bit there. And we're going to talk about the betting odds because that's what we do on this podcast as well. But let's start in Major League Baseball. And we've got quite a weekend forecast for you because it has been dry in the East for most of April. And in fact, where we are located in central Pennsylvania, we have over a 4-inch rain deficit. It was as high as up to 5 inches just last week. We need the rain, and it's coming at a good time because of that. However, it's also coming right in line with the weekend. There are proms. There are baseball games for Little League. There are a million different things people want to do this time of year, including go to some Major League Baseball games and including bet on those games. And I got to tell you, there are some series, Dan, I think are going to be washed out. So why don't you give folks the big setup as two separate systems come through? Talk about that. And then I'm going to list off some series that you may want to stay away from because they could be washed out.
Yeah. So first we have a system coming through mainly out of the Ohio Valley into the Northeast, even parts of the Mid-Atlantic too for Friday. Now, we've kind of avoided these big soaking rains. I know even going back to Wednesday night for the Philadelphia Phillies, they played through some rain. They had a rain delay to start, but they also had some rain during the game, but it wasn't enough to kind of shut things down. What's coming through on Friday with this front is consistent enough. So not a whole lot of breaks in the rain shield that I do think games are going to be hard to get in. I think there's going to be some postponements there. But the difficulty is once that front kind of swings through, a lot of the models slow down the moisture into Saturday and keep clouds around, light showers, and even periods of drizzle heading into Saturday afternoon. So if games do get postponed Friday, they could also be in jeopardy Saturday, especially if teams are trying to play a doubleheader to make up for Friday. So that's one thing to consider. The second thing is this active southerly jet stream is really kicking into high gear. It's actually more of a sign of our transition to El Nino. And the issue is it's picking up a lot of moisture, this jet stream along the Gulf Coast, and it's going to ride the East Coast into Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, Sunday night, up along the Carolinas, up through the Mid-Atlantic, and eventually into the Northeast. So 2 separate storm systems. It may really help with the drought situation, Brett, but it may not help these MLB franchises in their decision-making.
Well, the latest model guidance we're seeing is this could bring from tomorrow morning all the way into Sunday night 2 to 4 inches of rainfall, truly, and that would be very beneficial. It's not going to create any problems, but what it is going to do is wash out some of these series. So I've picked 3 series that could certainly be impacted: Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, there is a window Saturday afternoon and Saturday night that looks drier. We'll wait and see if that happens. But The Pirates traveled to the Nationals this weekend. So that is going to certainly be one to keep an eye on, especially for any Friday night or Sunday afternoon games. Next, the Guardians at the Red Sox. Boston is going to be affected by this Friday evening and again throughout the weekend. They may even be more affected on Saturday than some Mid-Atlantic teams as that low kind of stalls out and moves up. They may have the rain on Saturday. And then again, here's one that all Phillies fans are going to be keeping a close eye on. The Braves take on and travel to New York to face the Mets.
Now, you mentioned Phillies fans need to pay attention to this. I just want to point out, and Mets fans are going to hate me for it, this is the first time this week that they've had a 4-game losing streak under Buck Showalter. And the other kind of fly in the ointment is Pete Alonso has been their hottest hitter. And unfortunately, when he doesn't hit, when he doesn't have a home run, they have a losing record. So the Mets have their issues. The Braves also came a little bit back down to earth. And so the division is tightening. I know it's only April, but for those that were panic-stricken about the Phillies, this weekend is actually a good time for these teams to kind of beat up on each other. And the Phillies may have a window here to play a little catch-up. Now, the Phillies also have a tough stretch here. They have to play Seattle. That game is going to be in progress here on Thursday afternoon. It's a getaway day. And
we're going to come back to this because I want to make a point. In fact, let's just talk about it now.
Sure.
Very quickly. This game was interesting. The Mariners, they're certainly not world beaters, but like the Phillies, they've had their moments. So the Phillies so far have split the series. It would be nice to get the win later today. And if you're listening to this, who knows, the game may already be over. But we saw 2 different versions of the Phillies. We saw that version where they let things go early in a game. They did fight back, but it wasn't enough. They dropped the first one. But then what happened yesterday, and we are recording this Thursday afternoon, was, boy, did they fight their way back. They came back and they won the game. And that just showed that, again, when everything is clicking, because let me give a shout out again to a couple of things. And then you can take it from here. But you got to love Alec Bohm. I mean, we've given Bryson Stott a shout out before, but when Alec Bohm is hitting, the team does well. And then again, Jose Alvarado in the bullpen. It's a totally different story than where we were at this time last year with the bullpen and the year before. It has been transformed. He's been transformed. That is good to see. So both games, I thought they put up a fight. You're going to lose some. They were able to come back yesterday. If they can win this series, that's a good way to now start a road stretch. And that's my last comment. And then you kind of comment on what I'm talking about here. But the Phillies are away. They don't have to worry about this rainstorm coming up the East Coast.
No, they don't have to worry about the rain, and that's good because they do have some unfortunate pitching news to share that Taijuan Walker came out of the game Wednesday night with some forearm and elbow tightness. So that's never a great thing to hear. They kind of, cautioned any, big picture problems here, that they think it's relatively small. Rob Thompson said, we're taking this day by day, should not be a large issue, but it's something to keep your eye on for sure. So they are traveling to Houston, which, as you remember, the Phillies season last year ended in Houston with the World Series loss. So they have them through Sunday. So they go from the Mariners to Houston, some big AL West contenders. I think the Mariners are a playoff team, and I think this has been a very good test. And like you said, both games featured a Phillies team that hit the ball, maybe not enough in the first game, but certainly in the second game, I believe they had over 10 hits, and their pitching staff in total on Wednesday had over 10 strikeouts. That's a winning combination. And so if they can continue to play like that, even as they go into Houston against some tough starting pitching, they should at least win a game or two. I think the whole goal now, until Bryce Harper comes back, until this lineup is restored, is just kind of float around 500. Don't tank, but just hold your own. And I think they've been doing that so far. Other than the first week of the season, they're about a 500 club.
And they do have to go out and play the Dodgers then next. And
Yes.
That's going to be tough. That's going to be tricky. So it is going to be a tough road stretch. If they can kind of keep their head above water during that time, you're right, because Bryce Harper, have you seen this? I mean, the videos are posted everywhere. He's throwing, he's hitting, he's a freak of nature. I mean, he might be back very soon.
He might be back very soon. Now, will he be playing the field right away? Likely not. But if they can insert him into the DH role, he's been taking a lot of live BP before games, and the beat writers are tweeting out video. It's very encouraging. His swing looks good. He's hitting the ball hard. He's seeing different pitchers that have come up either from the minor leagues or maybe on a rehab. And he's seeing major league quality pitching, just not in game action yet. He's going to avoid going down to Lehigh Valley or even to Reading for his return back. There's no rehab involved with this injury, which to me is just remarkable that they're using these simulated machines to pitch to him. They're using these major league pitchers that are either on rehab or in AAA to throw to him. And they think there's no need for a rehab stint down in the minors. So what he is doing is unprecedented. There's only been one other player, and it goes back to Tony Womack of the Arizona Diamondbacks, that came back faster from Tommy John. So Bryce Harper, kind of like Terrell Owens. I don't know if you remember the hyperbaric chamber when they stuck T.O. in that ahead of the Super Bowl, and magically he came out and he was healed. That's what this reminds me of. I mean, it's such a quick recovery.
It is very impressive. So we're excited for his return. It may be next month, believe it or not.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying as early as May 5th. I mean, after this weekend, we could be seeing Bryce Harper, which is just phenomenal.
It really is unbelievable. And I that word gets overused, but it's phenomenal stuff. So again, to recap some MLB talk here, you want to stay away, if you care about the weather, from the Pirates National Series, the Guardians at the Red Sox, and the Braves at the Mets. And we'll see how many they get in. One last thing, and you wanted to talk about this. There's nothing like a hot dog and a beer at the ballpark. Let's start with the beer, because you wanted to talk a little bit about something you saw on Twitter the other day.
So if you follow Twitter and you follow Phillies accounts, there's a parody account called Fransky NLA. So they are the radio booth occasionally, not every game, but most home games. Fransky NLA call the games. They're a hoot together. I mean, they are really funny. If you ever get a chance, here in our neck of the woods, so in the mid-state, you can turn to 1270 or 1350 AM on the radio dial. I don't know who else uses it.
I get it on Sirius, because, you know, if you're a Phillies fan across the country, I'm sure you're listening, but they are fantastic. If you're in the car, if like me, you're out doing yard work and can't be in front of a TV, they're great. But they posted some stuff.
Yeah, so they just, Fransky NLA, it's a parody account basically coming up with phrases about the team and what's going on. And it's pretty comical most of the time. But this inspired a new beer. So shout out to Conshohocken Brewing Company for Fransky NLA. It is now a canned beer. It's called Bedlam at the Bank, a golden bottle. And if you're not familiar with the phrase Bedlam at the Bank, it goes back to Bryce Harper's home run in the NLCS, where they were down in the 8th inning. His home run put them over the top. I mean, it was a phenomenal moment. It's actually been 6 months since that happened, but I still watch that video, Brett, and I get chills. Just the energy in the stadium, plus his reaction. He knew it was gone. He just watched it. He floated around the bases, and it was euphoric.
He is like that Michael Jordan character that I hope will have many more iconic moments for this city in years to come. But you get chills watching it, and now you can have a cold one with it. And it is what a neat idea for a beer. That's the Conshohocken Brewing Company. We need to see if we could sample that.
Yeah, I want to kind of reach out and get a sample of that. Now, you alerted me to this. Somehow I missed this. I might have been distracted when this was going on, but there were hot dogs being thrown on the field during Dollar Dog Night here this past week at Citizens Bank Park. And give me the Kruk line, because I love John Kruk's line on television.
Well, it was one of those where they're showing different seeds, and you're wondering, okay, what's the holdup here? Well, then they realized that there was people throwing hot dogs on the field. It wasn't a big deal. But like John Crook said, that's a waste of a good hot dog there, Tommy McCarthy. And so, you come and I don't know what the point was, but yeah, with Philly fans just throwing hot dogs on the field. And that got you to thinking, what are our favorite types of hot dogs? I think we need to have some of these on the podcast maybe next week. If you had to pick one topping on a hot dog, what would it be? And mine would be, and this may sound gross to people, but it's so good. You put some mustard on and then you layer chili on top of the mustard. It is so good.
Oh, I love a chili dog, but I like that cheese whiz. I like the good melted cheese whiz on top with the chili. It is so good.
I can do real cheese on there. I mean, cheese is good no matter what. And you know what? I am a relish guy. I'll take a hot dog with some ketchup and relish. And you've got your Chicago dog. I think one of them has a pickle in it. That's okay. Yes. I've tried it. I could do a hot dog with just about anything on it. So I think we're going to have to look up some spots and see if they can bring in some hot dogs for us to try. What do you think?
I definitely think we got to do it. It is a staple of any baseball fan's life. Now, here's the trick, and this is always the hard part. I have a favorite Chase Utley jersey, and sometimes I wear it to the game. But then I'm afraid to get a hot dog because what if I squirt on my World Series Chase Utley?
You don't want that. That's a whole sitcom episode right there. You would have saved that. So maybe next week, and we got to see if we can get a sample of that beer too. So Dan, you work on that.
I'm gonna get on the horn here and make some calls.
Okay, you're big and famous, and I'm sure that they would be happy to support. So we're looking forward to that. Okay, a couple of things about college football before we move to the draft. Just some transfer portal notes for you here. Bear Alexander, which is a great name, by the way. He is out at Georgia, and it is official now. He's a defensive lineman, one of their best ones, oddly enough, out at Georgia and moving to USC. Lincoln Riley had to do something to ramp up the defense. And Dan, he did it. This is a big way to do it. I don't know if they offered him money, NIL, whatever, but he left Georgia. He's now out on the West Coast. You have to think that at least it shows it's a sign. I don't know if they're going to be that much better defensively, but Lincoln Riley knows he has an issue there and is doing something about it.
Anyone who transfers from Georgia, I want their head examined. You're going from a national championship contender to someone pretending to be a national championship contender. No thanks. I mean, maybe it was about money, but I'm getting more and more concerned about this transfer portal stuff, that a lot of this just does not make sense to me.
Well, Dan, allow me to let it make sense. You follow the money. And you can also follow, there's a guy from Penn State that he never played it down. He came in with the fall transfer, Storm Duck. You talk about another Bear Alexander and now Storm Duck. And I believe he announced he's going to Louisville, I saw.
Yep, that's correct.
And, so he never played it down for Penn State. Now, this was probably more about looking around and understanding that he may have never played it down anyway. That one to me was likely more about looking around the defensive room and maybe Manny Diaz and he didn't see eye to eye, or maybe he just simply realized there wasn't a starting spot for him at Louisville. There probably is. That makes more sense. You'd have to ask Bear Alexander if USC and Lincoln Riley had some cash waiting for him or what. And I know that may sound weird to some people, Dan, given what we're used to at college football, that this is all out in the open now, but that's the way it is. And you heard, Nick Saban last year, it started the whole feud with Jimbo Fisher saying that Jimbo, Texas A&M bought and paid for their whole team. Well, yeah, that's what's happening. It's the world we live in. Whether you like it, whether I like it, whether anybody likes it, it is NIL running the show, and it is creating some issues. But, why would somebody leave Georgia? Well, follow the money.
I suppose when you have a chance to be on top of the world, it just doesn't make sense to me. And by the way, let the season play out a little bit. I mean, who's to say that Storm Duck wouldn't have been CB1 if there's an injury? I just don't understand.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, again, it's an odd time we're living in, and it's hard to keep up with everything. Speaking of that, Nick Saban had some trouble after the A-Day game. There were very few people that watched thinking either Jalen Milroe or Tyson, his other quarterback, had a shot at being competitive and actually trying to be at a national championship level. Remember, winning 10 games isn't going to cut it. And Saban knows, he's never gone 3 years without winning a title. This is it. There's a lot of pressure on him. And probably got a few more gray hairs. That's why he had to dye it red. But he went shopping in the portal, and all of a sudden, Tyler Buckner, who started Notre Dame's bowl game. Remember, they got a transfer from
Wake Forest.
From Wake Forest, Sam Hartman, I believe.
Yep.
So he's coming in there, beats out Tyler Buckner. Tyler Buckner was, quote from him, Tommy Rees's guy. Tommy Rees said, that's my guy. Tommy Rees is now at Alabama. Alabama needs a quarterback. They go in and they get Tyler Buckner. Now, the question is, and that became official today, he is going to Alabama. Is this going to upset the apple cart? Is Saban going to lose his other QBs now because they're going to go in the portal and this guy is going to start? Or is it this guy feels comfortable with Tommy Rees? It's going to be a competition and Saban can keep everybody happy. I don't know, but things are getting a little weird at Alabama.
Yep. Yeah, and it's looking a little desperate. That's what I would say.
It's looking like the coach of a dynasty maybe is seeing the end of his reign.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we're there yet, Dan, but this is a weird situation, I think, and it just feels off.
It does feel off. I mean, the Tommy Rees hire from the start didn't make a ton of sense to me. It makes a little more sense he'd want to bring in his own quarterback. But correct me if I'm wrong, Saban does recruit five-star quarterbacks. It's not like the room was bare.
Yeah, it's not bare, but as we know, not every five-star pans out, and you're also going to be going against elite level competition. They need to beat the Tennessees. They need to beat the LSUs. These are teams they lost to last year, and beating a Big 12 team in the Sugar Bowl isn't going to cut it for the Feinbaum fans of the world. So I just think that Saban knows he needs to win and win now. He also sees the competition and knows whether or not, I mean, there was a couple of picks thrown against their own defense, which is very good, but you want your quarterback. Reese and Tyler Buckner can be it. But if you're looking for a quarterback this late, I don't know that this is necessarily what you want if you're an Alabama fan going into the end of the spring season.
Yeah, you don't want any turmoil behind the scenes, that's for sure. And we've seen it with Penn State in the past, that when there's been a quarterback competition, it leads to a lot of questions to begin the season.
Yeah, 100%. Well, you know who else was a transfer? Will Levis.
He was. I mean, what an interesting guy these days.
We've done some stuff about him on the podcast before. You drank mayonnaise coffee, and now Mr. Levis, there are some sports books that have him projected as being the number one overall pick. This is going to lead us now from the college football world into the draft world. And Dan, you've composed, when we talk about betting, some of the odds that are out there to bet on as we move into tonight and Friday and the weekend. So you've created the top three overall picks, and you've created the betting lines for the top three people listed. So when we look at the first overall pick, Bryce Young is the favorite, but here comes Mr. Levis. I don't want to necessarily say out of nowhere, but all of a sudden he started to shoot to the top here in the last couple of days. Can you figure this one out? And these odds are from FanDuel.
Well, so I think, and I don't know this, I'm not an NFL executive, but a lot of these guys that are in the front offices these days, and gals, they get obsessed with testing numbers, physical size, physical ability, and they try to translate that into the future of, okay, what is this kid going to look like once he matures in the NFL? And I think there's sometimes the disregard to the eye test, watching game film and watching their winning capabilities. Let's just go back to a couple of years ago when Jalen Hurts was an NFL prospect. He slipped to the second round because he didn't fit that profile. He didn't fit all the quantitative numbers for testing and for, whatever they're looking for, the criteria, but yet he's likely now the best quarterback in the NFC only 3 years into his career. So I always think these executives overthink things. They focus too much on the testing and the numbers, whereas a guy like Bryce Young, we know is a proven winner. Even CJ Stroud, we know is a proven winner. Will Levis did not have a good senior campaign with Kentucky. I'll just say it bluntly.
Yeah, I mean, there were some ill-timed fumbles. We saw that he got bent. Keep in mind, I mean, he was Sean Clifford's backup at Penn State. Right. And there was a game where, yes, Sean Clifford got pulled for Will Levis. And then Levis got pulled to put Clifford back in. Do you remember that?
I do remember.
So, I think the hype has to be tampered down. Now, CJ Stroud, I heard, too, did not score well on his decision-making test. These guys all have to take a test, and that may be knocking him down. Bryce Young's going to the Panthers, right? Let's just are we good with that pick?
Yeah, and ESPN's reporting that Air Jordan signed on with him. So
yes, he signed on with Air. and
I think that's kind of indicative of what's going on in the background.
100%. So I think Bryce Young is the number one pick overall. I wouldn't bet on anybody else at this point, and you're not going to get a big return on that. How about number two?
Number two, so we have Tyree Wilson, Will Levis, and Will Anderson. I'm actually really surprised about Will Anderson, linebacker, defensive line prospect, second overall. But Will Levis, to me, I feel like he may continue to slip down the board here a little bit.
Well, who has the second pick? And then you've got to look at their needs.
Yeah, so let me pull up the draft order here. So we're not doing this in the studio, so we don't have as many graphics at our disposal. But what I do want to say is I think Will Levis is more of a mid-round first round pick. So the Texans pick at 2.
Yeah, now they're
trying to trade out of it. That's why I wanted to look to see what the latest is.
They could use a quarterback, I suppose. I would honestly, now at plus 300, that's not bad. I think Will Anderson could go number 2, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on, do the Texans trade back? Do they try to get more draft capital? Who trades up? But, if Will Levis continues to slip, I could see a team more like the Raiders, the Falcons at 7 and 8, maybe taking more of a flyer on him. So it's always so interesting because the trades you can never fully anticipate in advance.
No, and that's why it's great drama unfolding. And finally, let's go with the third overall pick in the top 3. Will Anderson is there too. Here comes C.J. Stroud. Paris Johnson Jr. getting some interesting odds here.
Yeah, so Paris Johnson Jr. is actually a player that a lot of Philadelphia beat writers like going to the Eagles at 10, because if there is a run on quarterbacks early, he's going to fall. And the Eagles love to draft linemen, especially now with Lane Johnson getting a little bit longer in the tooth. Paris Johnson could come in. We have a hole at right guard, and he could be at least the right guard heir apparent until Lane decides, when to hang it up. So he's a very, very interesting player if you're an Eagles fan, but for any NFL fan, because he's NFL ready. He is an NFL ready offensive lineman. CJ Stroud, I think, will be the second quarterback off the board. That is just my personal opinion.
I would agree with you 100%. So my 3 picks, if I had to bet, which I stay away from this on draft night, but you can see the odds right here. I'm going to go Bryce Young, Will Anderson Jr., and then C.J. Stroud goes at number 3.
And so again, let's talk about the overall draft order. Panthers pick first, second, Cardinals third, and the Cardinals are an absolute mess. So it's hard to say exactly what they'll do, but they could easily go quarterback. Colts, then Seattle at 5.
Speaking of messes, the Colts.
Yes. Good luck, Shane Steichen.
Give me your quick thoughts. We want to get to the interview though. Quick. Who are the Eagles going to take at number 10?
I think if Paris Johnson's there, that's my guy. I've been thinking lineman the entire time, or your guy from Georgia. We talked about him a lot, Slater. I think, obviously there's some discipline issues there, but he's met with the Eagles. And apparently I saw on Twitter, and I apologize, I cannot remember the source, but he did say, if you are available at 10, do you feel that the Eagles are going to take you? And he said, yes.
Really?
Yes. And he does seem like, to me, the type of, quote unquote reclamation project the Eagles like.
Yeah. And you're talking about Carter. It's
I'm sorry.
Carter.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So, I mean, I could see it. I really could see it. I think that would be where my money would go right now. But we are not Jalen Carter at 10 to the Eagles. Now, we're not the experts, but we did talk to somebody who was. We're fans, and boy, did we get a lot of great information, didn't we, Dan?
Yeah, so now we're going to roll the Zach Berman interview. Again, you can follow him on The Athletic. I'm sure he's going to be tweeting nonstop tonight, as we will be too, especially if the Eagles have another big night.
All right, we're very excited today to have Zach Berman from The Athletic joining us, and Zach is the beat writer for the Philadelphia Eagles on The Athletic. Now, Zach, you follow the Eagles day in and day out. Has to be a tiring job as of late. It feels like since the draft of last year, it's just been nonstop Eagles, and in many ways, it seems like the Eagles are at the top of the NFL. What's your job been like over the last year?
I wouldn't say tiring. I would say fun, right? I mean, I suppose tiring would work, but it's been interesting in that sometimes the most I don't want to say exciting seasons, the most interesting seasons to cover are the ones you don't expect in either way. And the Eagles were loaded last year going into the season, so you knew they were going to be good. But Super Bowl good, that certainly changes things. So it was interesting to cover. I mean, seeing Jalen Hurts develop, seeing Nick Sirianni's team come together, the first year with A.J. Brown, Hassan Reddick, what they did on defense. There was a lot of storylines. It was, if on a personal level, we were back in the locker room. So for those who don't know, for the 2 year in 2020 and 2021, because of COVID, we weren't in the locker room every day. Being back in the locker room made the job better to do, and you're able to tell richer stories and fuller stories and understand things in a more clear way. So on all levels, it was an enjoyable season.
That's a great point too, because just I'm sure as writers and storytellers, being closer to the action helps, and without that, the previous 2 years, sure, I bet that was exciting. Let's talk about the NFL calendar now. Really, no off season anymore. You couple that with a deep postseason run for the Eagles, and man, I mean, here we are already. It just speeds ahead into full draft mode. What type of prep work can you realistically do to look at so many prospects here coming up with the draft?
Well, it's also fun. I keep using that term, right? But I mean, first off, I'm a big college football fan, so I'm watching these guys casually throughout the season, and in a lot of cases, the past 2, 3, 4 years, right? Some of these prospects have been on radar for a long time, and then leading into the combine, you do a lot to familiarize yourself with them. You meet them at the combine, and then really the past month and a half, just trying to get a better sense of where the positions of strength are, who the players to know are. But I'm also honest, like there are really good reporters and draft analysts, if you will, in the media, such as Dane Brugler at The Athletic, mm-hmm. who you lean on their insight. But also you talk to a lot of people, and then you have a sense. I'm going into my 12th year covering the Eagles, and you have a sense of the way they think and the way they approach things, and that kind of helps you hone in on what players, what positions to focus on.
You mentioned just a little bit ago about how loaded the Eagles were coming into the Super Bowl run, but now they've had some additions, but also some notable subtractions. In a general sense, with your draft prep work, how does that play into what the Eagles may do on draft day or even leading up to draft day?
It's a good question because my answer might be counterintuitive to what you guys or what some of your listeners might think, in that the common thing to do is to say, all right, these are the positions of need. This is where they're going to draft. But I don't think the Eagles are going to approach this draft in that way. I think they're going to view this more for their 2024, 2025, 2026 depth charts than their 2023 depth chart. And when I say counterintuitive, because there tends to be a thought that, well, they have a roster that can contend for the Super Bowl, so add a player who's going to improve your odds by X%, whatever you might think X are, for the season. So let's take running back. Bijan Robinson, what he could do to your team. There's a school of thought that says go in that direction because of what it could do for your 2023 team. I actually think the Eagles view this like as a long-term play, number one, but also let's take the number 10 pick in particular, that they don't think they're going to be drafting number 10 very often for a long time, or so they want to use this as a chance to get a building block player at a foundational position. That's at least the way I view it. So I pay less attention to positional needs. I think later on in the draft, day 3, you tend to try to, plug certain depth spots on your depth chart. But the way Howie Roseman, when he's drafted at his best, he's used free agency and trades to fill the depth chart, the top of the depth chart, that is, and then use the draft to just add the best players, add positional priorities.
Yeah, well put on all of that, and that brings us to our next question. Sometimes this front office hasn't had the most sterling draft day reputation in terms of the first round, but in many ways, and you just pointed this out, the franchise does better in the middle rounds. So kind of a two-part question here. With 2 first-round picks this year, how does the team go about making sure that those picks are solid, especially like when you just pointed out, they don't expect to maybe have a 10 pick for a while. And then a better question might be, is Howie prepared to maybe do some dealing and try to pick up a middle round pick?
I imagine it would be kind of a cliche joke or a bad joke for you guys to say that forecasting a draft prospects like forecasting a snowstorm, right?
I think you're right.
Mean, I don't have I don't know anything about meteorology, so I'll defer to you that. But I do know a lot of things can change, right? And it's the same thing with the draft prospect, that the health, the situation they're in, how they react to pressure, how they react to money. There's a lot of variables that are hard to account for. So you're never going to get a perfect record on draft night. But to answer your question, I do think the Eagles are going to be active trading. They only have, they don't really have a lot of picks right now. I think they're going to add more volume. I think they can do that by trading back in the first at the number 30 spot. I think they can trade in the second round, add middle round picks. I think they could trade from their 2024 draft inventory if they want. But I would say Howie Roseman's very strategic in that if you look at his history, he moves up or down. He very seldom stands where he is unless they're drafting number 4 overall or something. So I could see them moving. And what was the first part of the question? I apologize.
Just if they stick with the 2 first-round picks, how can they make that? How can they ensure that they're pretty solid picks? And maybe you answered that by saying that they're not worried about position players, but they want to look to the future.
Yeah, I think, another cliche you always hear is best player available, and that is true. But I think with the way the Eagles look at it, best player available at priority positions. So they're always going to prioritize the offensive line and the defensive line. They're not going to prioritize running back or linebacker. They do care about cornerback, even though they haven't drafted one in the first round since Lito Shepherd in 2002. Last year, 2 years ago, they were very interested in cornerbacks in the top half of the draft. So I think if you look at where they emphasize, and then you say, who are the best players at those positions, that gives you a clue on how they would approach the draft.
Well, Zach, we appreciate your thoroughness because you're hitting on some of our later questions already. And again, it's great.
I wish Howie Roseman did that with me. So.
Yeah,
right.
So, going back to the Andy Reid days, it's been well documented. Big Red build up front, whether it's the offensive tackles, the defensive tackles. And I guess it's fair to say some of that depth has been tested now with the departures of Andre Dillard and Javon Hargrave. So kind of explain, who's out there. I mean, do you see them going with these big guys, maybe first round, maybe middle rounds?
Well, it would surprise me if they don't come out, let's say their top 3 picks with at least one guy who rushes the quarterback. And I think 2 of their top, it could very well be someone who rushes the quarterback, someone who protects the quarterback. But certainly, I would say pass rusher, whether that's on the edge, whether that's on the interior. I really think that's a spot to look. So this is, I think, a good draft of both of those positions. I mean, depending on whether you're talking about 10 or you're talking late first or early second. At 10, whether it's I don't know if Tyree Wilson will be in their range or Nolan Smith, Lucas Van Ness. I like Miles Murphy from Clemson. There's a handful of players in that range. Jalen Carter at defensive tackle is somebody who he would only be available at 10 if there's because of off-field concerns. But if the Eagles were to trade up, he's someone to watch. If they can somehow trade up for Will Anderson, he would be someone to watch. Point being, there's a lot of really talented players who affect the quarterback in this draft, in the top of the draft, and I think that's where the Eagles would look.
It makes sense, and we'll follow up on the Lito Shepherd comment because is he really the last high-profile cornerback pick for the team? I mean,
Eric Rowe doesn't count.
Yeah, I mean, is there any scenario you see where the Eagles could go off-brand and select a linebacker, a safety, or a CB early, or that's just not in the cards again?
I don't think cornerback would be off brand, right? Because 2 years ago, for instance, if Devontae Smith was taken in the top 10, I think the Eagles would have traded up for J.C. Horn or traded up for Patrick Surtain. If Derek Stingley dropped or Sauce Gardner dropped last year, I think the Eagles would have tried to trade up for either of those players. So I think that's more circumstantial than it is like a draft philosophy. I think safety, linebacker, running back, that's more draft philosophy. It would really surprise me if at number 10 or in the top 20, let's say, the Eagles drafted a safety, a linebacker, or a running back. I think that cornerback would be in play, whether it's Christian Gonzalez, whether it's Devin Witherspoon, even Joey Porter Jr. There are a handful of players there that you can make arguments for in that like 10 to 15 range. If the Eagles were to trade back a few spots. So I certainly think that cornerback is in play. It would surprise me if that's a running back or a linebacker.
So going back to last year, I think we were all just so excited, Brett and I both, and Dave Shiner, our audio engineer. I mean, the biggest player they got on draft day was likely A.J. Brown, and that came in such a surprise trade with the Titans, who had some cap issues. Lo and behold, they have cap issues again this year. Are there any teams like that you see the Eagles making a trade with? Howie runs the cap so well, he's happy to help out some of these teams that don't do it so hot.
Yeah, I think the Eagles are in a different position right now just because that Jalen Hurts contract's coming down the pike. We know that at some point here they're going to give Jalen a big deal, and I think they would be more apt to try to get a blue chip player on a cost controlled rookie contract than they would to trade for a veteran and pay him $20 million a year, which anyone you're trading a first round pick for, you're going to do that. Now that doesn't mean that the Eagles won't look to trade for veterans. I think the players to watch would be, though, more guys who are entering the final year of their rookie contracts. So that's the profile of when they trade. Well, A.J. Brown was that, but they gave him an extension. But when they traded in the past for Tim Jernigan, and they traded in the past for Jordan Howard, they traded last year for C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Trading for players who maybe want a new deal. The team that has them isn't going to pay him a new deal. And even if the Eagles don't sign him to a new deal, he fits a spot on the team this year. And that does not often require a first-round pick. I can see the Eagles doing that with a pick from next year, with a pick later on in the draft. So I would certainly pay attention to that market.
And again, forecasting these things is difficult, as you mentioned. But just one more question about these mid-round picks. I mean, again, we don't expect, or I should ask you, you don't really expect Howie to stay quiet in those middle rounds, do you? I mean, there may be some wheeling and dealing. Just a final thought on that to try to get the Eagles somebody of value in there where they've typically done well. I mean, they are probably going to try to get a middle round pick, correct?
Yeah, I can't speak for Howie, but I think knowing Howie now for a decade plus, he's not the type to sit on his hands. So I imagine that he'll be aggressive using whatever assets he has to acquire draft assets this year.
Do you think with these trades that there's any veteran players on the current Eagles roster that could be in play for other teams? I mean, we don't see it too often with Howie, him trading NFL veterans, but could this be the year, since you mentioned the Jalen Hurts contract coming up?
Players who might not have the same spot on the depth chart. So let's say in theory they added a wide receiver in the first 2 or 3 rounds. I could see them trying to trade Quez Watkins at that point. They lost so many guys in free agency this year that I don't think they have as many trade candidates. A year ago, I would have said they had more guys who fit that profile. Jalen Reagor, who they ended up trading. Andre Dillard, who they did not trade. But I think they had more guys who fit the profile of players who were reserves in Philly who might have needed a change of scenery. I don't know if they have as many this year.
Interesting.
Let's zoom out a little bit from the Eagles. And again, we know that maybe, being a draft expert isn't in your wheelhouse, so to speak. But, covering the NFL, looking at the NFL as a whole, this could be a draft-heavy quarterback round initially as some of these college quarterbacks come up. Who do you think is going to go number 1 overall? What are you hearing? What do you think? Any other notable round 1 headlines you anticipate as we approach day 1?
Yeah, I think Bryce Young. I think Bryce Young's going to go number 1. Well, actually, I take that back. I think Bryce Young should go number 1. I think he's the best quarterback in this draft. I try not to, if you look at Frank Reich, Carolina Panthers head coach's draft history, or at least quarterback history, certainly C.J. Stroud makes more sense in terms of the prototypical size. Now, the GM in Carolina was in Seattle, and they drafted Russell Wilson. And Bryce Young has everything you want except the size. I mean, C.J. Stroud's a really good player too, so I can see C.J. Stroud going number one. It's gonna be one of those two guys. Newsflash, right? But I think it'll be one of those two guys. I think Anthony Richardson is gonna keep being pushed up the board, and I think a team could trade up to number 3 potentially to get Richardson.
Wow.
Or potentially Indianapolis at 4, but it would really surprise me if Richardson doesn't go in the top 5, let's say, because I think there just aren't players with that type of with those traits very often. But again, I haven't worked on the quarterbacks as much as I have in past years because of Jalen Hurts' presence. Right, there was a point in time where I thought the Eagles might be one of those teams trying to move up in the draft. Right, I didn't know if Jalen was going to be the guy. Jalen's very much is the guy. So honestly, you have I'm not a draft analyst, but I do a lot of draft work here. I just haven't focused as much on quarterbacks, so my insight is more based on what I've seen on Saturdays and then what I hear and what I read.
Can you answer one other quick question, though? You brought up Jalen Carter, and there are some off-field issues there, but also I thought I had heard that he didn't have a great performance at the Combine. Are teams worried about any of that, or you still suggested? I mean, he's got the right stuff, so he is likely to go high. Was there any buzz about him coming out of the Combine, negative, positive? I mean, where do things stand with him right now?
Well, it's more that the pro day wasn't particularly good. The Combine, he actually left the Combine because that's when
that's right.
That's when the charges came, right?
Right.
So there's a lot there for teams to have to dig into off the field, and I'm not qualified to speak to what particular, if teams are satisfied with what they find out. But I will say from a football perspective, I mean, he's a rare player. And I can also say when the Eagles were scouting Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean last year, I remember talking to someone who was watching that film saying, like, number 88 kept showing up as maybe the best player on the team. And that was a year ago. Right, and Jalen Carter was awfully good this year on the team that won the national championship. So, from a football perspective, it's hard if you're sitting at number 10 and that's a priority position, and you have someone who could potentially be one of the top players in the league at that position. Everything in the draft is a risk-benefit analysis, right? I mean, whether it's off the field, whether it's injuries, whether there's so many variables, like we said. I think at that point, the benefit would outweigh the risk. From where I sit.
Yeah, interesting. Good stuff.
Yeah, so going back to the draft, any big surprises you see coming? I mean, is there something predictable this year, or is it more the same that something is just going to shock us either day 1 or day 2?
I don't know about shocking, but I do think that a lot of mock drafts are going to be more wrong than usual this year. The reason I say that is because I think there's a lot of ambiguity even from like 10 to 30, there's more ambiguity than usual. I think oftentimes you have a sense, all right, these are the top 15 guys, or these are the top 20 guys, and you don't know the order. But I think there's a lot of ambiguity in terms of how these edge rushers stack up, for instance, right? In the past, that the wide receivers have been more highly thought of than this year, right? I mean, when you have one of the players in the draft, Bijan Robinson, like we said, is an elite. He's anyone you talk to says he's one of the top 5, 10 players in this draft, but he's not at a position where teams typically want to invest. So when does he come off the board? And then the quarterbacks, because all right, I think there's a lot of agreement on Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud. I think there's less agreement on Anthony Richardson, and there's less agreement on Will Levis, and there's a lot of teams that still need quarterbacks. So how does that factor into it? So I think that there's probably more unknown in like the, let's say, like 7 to 20 range or 7 to 25 range. But again, I'm cautious of saying sometimes what I think and what the general thought is on the outside is different than the way teams are thinking inside the building.
Well, that's what makes it fun, and certainly your insight is incredible. We've appreciated it, but before we let you go, as you correctly pointed out, we are meteorologists, so we've had a lot of guests on, and we always like to end with one final question here.
Yeah. So the question is, and I think you guys have alluded to this, so we should have mentioned that you and Bo Wolf are on a podcast, Birds with Friends, and I think you've complained at times, or maybe Bo has, about the weather.
Probably Bo. Yeah.
Probably Bo. Any weather stories from whether you're in the booth or on the field covering the game, anything that sticks out to you in your 12 years as an Eagles writer?
Well, I think anyone who's covered the team during my period, which is 2012 on, would probably give you the same answer. And players and coaches too would give you this answer. That in 2013, December of 2013, they were playing the Detroit Lions, and during pregame warmups, it was beautiful. Like absolutely, I shouldn't say beautiful, but it was a clear night, or a clear afternoon rather, in South Philadelphia. I don't even know if I brought a jacket to work that day, right? Like, I was just going from the parking lot to the press box, and I was watching the game in the press box. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, well, I say out of nowhere, I'll defer to you guys, right? But it started to snow like crazy. And that's the famous snow bowl, right? You see those pictures, but the players weren't prepared. They had to change their cleats at halftime. I know certainly the Lions weren't prepared. That kind of came out of nowhere. It was a fun visual, but I remember walking to my car. I was not prepared. I was certainly not prepared for the snow. So that's one that jumps out. And then the other one is I covered the Super Bowl in the same season, 2013 season, but 2014 Super Bowl, if my memory's correct, the one in New York.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. It was like it was 50 degrees, and there was so much concern about a Northeast Super Bowl and how the elements would factor into it. And it was nice out. And then I guess the last one, and this one you could easily predict, but being in Minnesota in February and January, in late January, early February, is cold. I knew that, right? But when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl there in January, February 2018, that was as cold as I've been, right? And I went to college in Syracuse, so I'm used to snow and I'm used to cold. But that, I guess those are some weather stories that jump out. And then there are a lot of times in training camp when it's also, and again, I'll defer to you guys with the weather, but it seems it's either like completely clear for 3 weeks of training camp, and they never have to go inside and it's never wet, or it just rains all the time. Right? It's never like there's just like 2 or 3 days of rain. It either wipes out the summer or it's a completely dry summer.
Oh, we see that all the time up here. We really appreciate the insight, Zach, and I know you got to get running, so we'll let you do that. Remind everyone where they can find you, where they can listen to you, and some of your social handles too.
Sure. You can read me on The Athletic. You can listen to me on Birds with Friends. I'm on Twitter @ZBerm. And if you want to relive the Super Bowl season, you can read Underdogs, the Philadelphia Eagles' emotional road, the Super Bowl victory.
That's awesome. Well, we certainly appreciate your time, Zach. Thanks for joining us on Weather Wagers, and come on back when you have some time.
Look forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
Zach Berman from The Athletic. We were thrilled to talk to him, Dan. He gave us some great nuggets. If you're an Eagles fan, and again, he knows the front office. He's been covering the team for a long time. We're so thrilled he made time for us. And we certainly hope that as you're watching the draft tonight, you keep those things in mind. It is going to be interesting to see what they do with that late first-round pick.
I think it's all very interesting. I mean, I think the Eagles are in such a unique position that they already have a deep roster. Yes, they have a few holes here and there. Every NFL team does. But to me, they're the toast of the NFC right now. And these types of drafts, when you don't have a glaring need per se, can really set you up for an even deeper run. And, I don't want to go dynasty yet, but you just signed Jalen Hurts. You have 2 elite wide receivers. You have a pretty good running back room. You have a great tight end in Dallas Goedert. Your defense still, even with the additions and subtractions, should be just fine. I mean, this is the time to stomp, in my opinion. This is the time to leave no doubt.
100%. Ask Bill Belichick. I mean, he was able to do it and make those trades and make those picks and make those plays to continue his dynasty. And, you got to win one to call it a dynasty, but you at least want the Eagles to stay good. And these types of drafts matter. So our thanks to Zach. Dan, tell everybody where they can find us each week.
Yeah, sure. So you can go to our website, abc27.com. You can find us there. Weather Wagers has its own separate section on the website. You can hover over weather. You can click on Weather Wagers. You can watch old episodes. But if that's not your jam, if you want to listen to us via podcast, we're on every podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, plus YouTube. You can watch the video version and listen to us too, wherever you are. So, Brett, there's no excuse not to find us, as I always say.
No, and a lot of people have on YouTube, and we appreciate that. So, listen, that's it for us. We hope you enjoy the draft tonight, tomorrow night, throughout the weekend, and we'll be right back here next week. Enjoy the draft, and we'll see if Roger's chair makes an appearance here. That's always my favorite part. But, Dan, I wish you and everybody else a great weekend.
Yep, and I'll be on tonight, too, during the draft, so I'll be pretty excited leading into the 11 if the Eagles make some big moves. I'm really hoping for another big night. I don't think they can top last year. That's my big prediction. To get Jordan Davis and A.J. Brown in the same night, that's pretty hard to beat, but I think it's going to be a good night.
Well, have a good show. Tune in for Dan. He'll be on, and I'll be on tomorrow morning, and have a great weekend of sports, everybody. Enjoy the draft.